Hello, welcome to the second lesson of my lesson series. This lesson is going to be all about intervals and chord construction, and it's very important that you pay attention to this lesson as well as really have the end of the first lesson really down pat, the part about scale degrees and tensions, because this lesson combined with that last section of the first lesson is going to be the foundation of the third lesson, which is going to be about advanced chord construction. A lot of fun, cool, jazzy, funky chords. So to get to that, though, you really do have to have those two pieces down pat. And if you don't, please give it a rewatch or please review it, because that's how you're going to get the most out of the third lesson. All right, so with that in mind, let's get into today's lesson by talking about intervals. All right, so first things first, what is an interval? An interval is the musical distance between two notes that are played simultaneously. Which means intervals actually occupy a very interesting place musically, because they are more than a melody, since a melody is a single notes played in a sequence, a bunch of single notes played in a sequence, and they are less than a chord because a chord is three or more notes played simultaneously, as we'll see in this lesson. So you get this very interesting middle ground spot where intervals are really the threshold of harmony. And like any fundamental building block or threshold, that makes them very interesting and a very integral part of a lot more advanced concepts and kind of the very foundation of how you understand chords and how you understand harmony. In other words, they're really interesting, really important, and really cool. So let's talk about them a little bit deeper by once again referencing my handy-dandy piece of paper. Alright, so as you can see, this is the same thing we were working on last time. At the end of last lesson, we have the C major scale with the scale degrees written out, the numerical values we attached based on the order that we played the notes in. Now the beauty of scale degrees is they provide a really nice basic framework to start thinking about intervals. So the way that works out is the scale degree, the distance between two scale degrees, is an easy way to think about the interval. For example, C is a 1, D is a 2, C to D is a second, or C and D is a second. C is a 1, E is a 3, so C to E is a third. C to F is a fourth. C to G is a fifth. C to A is a sixth. C to B is a seventh. And C to C is an octave. Yep, it gets a special name because it's an octave. But you can see how that second number and that distance that it went 1, so 1 to 2, it went 2, 1 to 3, tells you what the interval is. So by writing out the scale, you can figure out what the intervals between the notes are. So that's convenient. And it works for each note. The only thing is you have to think again based on distance, not on names. So similarly to 2 minus 1 is 1 and 3 minus 1 is 1, so the distance between 1 and 2 and 3 is no different. Music is the same way. So if we start with D now, so we're doing all the intervals based on D, instead of the first time we did all the intervals based on C, D to E, 2 to 3 is one space, similar to 1 to 2. So D to E is a second. D to F is a third for the same reason. 2 to 4 is 2 spaces, just as 1 to 3 is 2 spaces. D to G is a fourth. D to A is a fifth. D to B is a sixth. D to C is a seventh, and if there was a second D there, D to D would be an octave again. So the distance, again, is what is important, not the numbers. So you can go from any of these notes as long as you follow it as a 1 spaces, as a 2 spaces, you can get the interval. Now the slight snag in things is that only gets you the basic interval. Each interval comes in 2 forms. So you have a major and a minor second, a major and a minor third, a perfect and an augmented fourth, a perfect and diminished fifth, and I'll explain why they have different names in a little bit, a major and a minor sixth, a major and a minor seventh, and then an octave doesn't get messed with because it has to be that one note. It has to complete the octave. Now, how do you tell, though, if it's a major sixth or a minor sixth, a major third or a minor third? How do you tell the difference? Well, that works the same as kind of scales do, with an interval formula. So the musical distance in half steps and whole steps that the interval is. So, for example, actually, I should say before I get into that, the other way to think about it, but this only really works with a root note, is whatever scale you pull the notes from determines what the name is. So this is the C major scale, so all intervals relative to C will be major or perfect. Now, the reason why I say that only really works with the root note is if you move over to D, well, the C major scale is closer to the D Dorian mode, And the D Dorian mode is more close to minor than it is to major sounding, but yet there will be major intervals off of D in this scale. So you can't really do that to the other notes, you can only do that to the root note. But that will be helpful for us to name the formulas at least. So for example, we know C to D is a major second. So what is the distance from C to D on the fretboard or musically? So C to D is a whole step. So all whole steps are major seconds. And by logic, a half step is a minor second. So this starts to make sense then. So if it was C to C sharp, it would be a minor second. And you can do the same thing for all the notes relative to C or any of the other notes too. So, you know, C to E, for example, is a major third. We know that from the scale, and we know that now 2 whole steps is a major third. Now if we start using D as our root, we can go, all right, D to E, all right, that's a major second because it's also a whole step. Now D to F, though, is not 2 whole steps, it's 1.5 steps. So that means it's a minor third because it's a half less than the major. And that's how most of the intervals work. It's just a similar idea behind it being, you know, a whole step or a half step. You know, if it's 1 less, it's half. If it's 1 more, it's whole. It's the same idea. Intervals are just naming that in a special way based on how the note sounds, because a major third and a minor third sound very different from each other. Now that leads us now to the perfect fourth and perfect fifth issue. Now, as you can see, actually based on that definition, though, you might be able to deduce why it's not, there is no minor fourth and major fourth. Because what would a minor fourth be? Well, if I take F and go down half a step, I'm on E. I'm on a major third, so I can't have a minor fourth. So my only direction to go is up. So then if I go up, I call it augmented. And that happens a lot in music. That's just a semantics thing. But I have to go up, so I'd have to go from F to F sharp. So that means I have an augmented fourth, and my regular F is a perfect fourth. Perfect doesn't always mean without flaws. It usually means complete, so it's a complete fourth rather than having anything mess with it. For the fifth, it's just the opposite. If I go up, it will be a minor sixth. You know, G sharp is a minor sixth, and I don't want to step on the minor sixth toes, so I have to go back. And this is the only also interval that you'll notice that has an overlap, that has 2 names for the same note. So I have a diminished fifth and a perfect fifth. So the diminished fifth and the augmented fourth is the same note. And as you might guess, that note is kind of important. It's actually called a tritone. It's one of the only notes that has another name to it that makes it special. Why is it special? It's the exact middle of the scale. It's the only note that's equidistant from both octaves. It also has some cool functions and some interesting history. It was actually originally called the Devil's Interval by the church because they thought if you played it, someone's Satan, because it was evil sounding to them. It's a very cool note. Those are all just fun facts to keep in the back of your head. We'll probably have more to talk about that when we get into blues lessons. But it's a cool note. But that's why it's perfect and augmented and perfect and diminished. So those are all the basic intervals. In a later lesson, I will go over how to play them, how to use intervals for the sake of using intervals. But I now want to take those intervals and talk about how we build chords from them. So as we go to box 2 here, as we go to my second box here, these have the chords written out for the triads that we've made. Now to make a triad, it's very simple. You pick a third and a fifth relative to whatever note you selected. And that would make the basic triads. Now the rules are you have to pick a third and a fifth that fall in the scale if you're making scale-based chords. This makes sense. You have to take notes from the scale to build chords that are in the scale. So now if we start with C and take the third and the fifth, we get, all right, here's our note C. The third, as we talked about, and it's a major third in this case, is E. And the perfect fifth is G. So we get C, E, G. Awesome. So that's our first triad. Triad because it's 3 notes. So I picked the third and I picked the fifth. So I have C, E, G, which makes C major. It's a major because of the third is a major third. So now we can do the same thing from D. So D, all right, the closest third is F, which we know is a minor third, so it's probably a minor chord. Then we go to A. A is a perfect fifth for D. So we go D, F, A, D minor. And you can do the same thing for each of these notes, and that's how you get the basic triads. Now, one of the interesting ones is B, if you'll notice, actually. So if you went and did these all out, and I recommend you, for each note, you write it out yourself. It's good practice of your intervals and for chords. If you do it for B, you get something kind of interesting. So B is our root, so we go back, we get to D. So B to D is a minor third. All right, that's not too weird. But B is the only one that doesn't have a perfect fifth. It has a diminished fifth, actually, an F. So that makes B kind of interesting, and we won't go into too much. It's a diminished triad for B because it's a flattened third, it's a minor third, and a flattened fifth. But it is something to keep in the back of your mind. That will be something very important when we get to jazz, because that makes, when you build off of that, you get a very important jazz chord. But it is just something interesting to note. But if you do it out for all of those chords, what I said, you take the third and the fifth based on the scale, you get all of the basic harmonic values that are in a key. So C, E, G, so is the first triad that we got, so that's C major. D, F, A is the triad based off of D, and it's D minor because F is a minor third. You get E, G, B, which is also a minor because E to G is a minor third. You get F, A, C, which is F major. Again, F, A is a major third. G, B, D, which is also major because G to B is a major third. A, C, E, which is a minor, and B, D, F, which I talked about, is a diminished triad, or a minor flat 5, if you want to call it, because that will be hinting on what it is in jazz terminologies. Hello, I apologize for the choppiness. I was recording this lesson, I realized it is really long, and I still had a few major points I wanted to discuss. No pun intended, because the intervals, haha. Wow, that was an awful joke. Anyways, there were a lot of things I really wanted to talk about that I didn't want to rush through. So I'm going to pick up the concepts of how you can tell what key you're playing in based on the triads that we just built, and why the triads are important and how they are kind of the fundamental parts of harmony in the third lesson. And then I'll probably kick advanced chord construction off to the fourth lesson. So I will wrap up this lesson in almost kind of a part 2 fashion in the third lesson, maybe include a few more little easy bonus concepts that aren't too hard to go through, and we'll take it from there. So I will see you in the third lesson, and thank you for watching.